I'm sure you've all heard it before. Troubled launch, tons of server issues, bad monetization. Sounds like a new MMO, right? Oh, and then of course the developers are far too slow to fix things and the game lacks content. It's pretty much a recipe for your game dying very quickly, especially as a small indie project, and especially if your publisher decides to pull out halfway through the process. This is exactly where Airship Syndicate found themselves after launching their new MMO Wayfinder. But there could be a happy ending here, and that's what makes this story so interesting. Now, as part of researching this video, I did end up playing some Wayfinder Echoes, and I was actually surprised that the game was pretty darn fun. So there's a very good chance I'm going to cover it in a little bit more detail in the future. This video is very much around the situation behind Wayfinder Echoes, not so much about the game itself. So if you want to see more about the game, then get subscribed, leave a like while you're down there. For now, let's get into things. MMOs are one of the hardest games to make and maintain. So very often, when a new MMO launches, there's a massive amount of hype. But then as people realize there isn't that much content, the update cadence isn't that fast, hype dies down. In some cases, like with the Elder Scrolls Online, it dies down to a really healthy level. And in other cases, like New World, well, how low can it go? I don't know, we haven't seen negative player counts on a game yet, so I guess New World could fall a bit further still, especially with how they're handling their PR recently. For more on that, check out my recent video on the absolute mess that is New World Eternum. This same story is exactly what played out with Wayfinder. When it first released, there were tons of server issues. Plenty of negative reviews that say, hey, I just want to log in and play, and I can't. To an extent, server issues are expected on a new launch, but combine the fact that the publisher was quite inexperienced and the developer had never made an MMO before, well, at that point you're going to get a perfect storm, which is the forever queue. And then there was the original monetization, which was nothing short of dire. I'm talking the pack sells you 1100 of something, and it costs 1150 for the thing you actually want to buy. So you have to spend twice as much money as you want, and then you have a whole bunch of leftover points, so you might as well buy more stuff later, right? And for this one, I'm actually pretty hesitant to put all of the blame on the dev. Because in a lot of cases, the decisions around how to price a game, what to sell, is made by the publisher, not the developer. So, at the very least, Digital Extremes Publishing should have stepped in and said, no, that's a really fucking stupid idea, don't do it. Or at worst, they were the ones who had the really fucking stupid idea to sell the packs for just slightly less than the thing players want to buy. And for a good example of what I mean by this, look at the Helldivers 2 situation. It wasn't Arrowhead Game Studios that delisted Helldivers 2 from many regions, because in that case, Sony was the one making the decisions. But for Airship Syndicate, the makers of Wayfinder, the situation was about to get a lot worse. Not only did they have all of these issues, and not only did they need to find a way to fix their game, but also Digital Extremes dissolved their publishing branch. Because now Airship Syndicate, again the developer and maker, but not the publisher, had a broken MMO. They probably couldn't afford the server costs, especially because they've said since the money went to their publisher, i.e. they literally didn't have the money to keep going. And even if they did have the money to keep going, it was going to take a lot of time and a lot of money to not only fix their game, but continue to develop it and continue to add content, which is what's demanded by the rigors of a live service. This is why when I see an indie company talk about our game is going to be a live service, I kind of die inside, because that is not an easy task. Even with a publisher, it's difficult. Having your publisher drop you about halfway through your launch, well, Airship Syndicate was left with one of two choices. Behind door number one, you have what normally happens. The game dies, the servers are shut down. No one's able to log in, no one's able to play. If you're really, really lucky and the game was popular enough, you'll get a fan revival project that does allow people to play the game, maybe even adds content, but that's only if the IP holder does say, hey, we're chill with this, and also if people care enough. With a game that wasn't around for very long, like Wayfinder, I think this happy ending of fan support, basically an impossibility. So behind door number one is the game shuts down, there is no more Wayfinder. And so they chose option 2, to do something a little bit crazy. Relaunch Wayfinder as a single-player ARPG with peer-to-peer co-op. Because now you don't have to worry about server costs. If you make the game a complete experience, you don't have to worry about continuing to develop that content cadence like you would with a live service. And yes, it's going to make a lot of players upset who bought into the MMO, especially those who bought supporter packs. And I completely understand anyone who bought a supporter pack for an MMO feeling upset when all of a sudden they have a single-player offline ARPG. But personally, I'm all for it in this case, because the options really seem like they were: 1, Wayfinder shuts down and disappears forever. No game at all for anyone. Or Wayfinder is relaunched as a single-player title, and there is a game for those who enjoy it. And the developers also chose to sell Wayfinder Echoes at a reasonable $25 price point, which also means that if Wayfinder Echoes is good and more people buy it, there's a chance for updates, there's a chance for future content. Though the developers have been very conservative in what they've been talking about here, because they definitely don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, especially after the failure of their MMO. And also, on the note of purchasing supporter packs for MMOs or purchasing supporter packs for any game that's just come out, I would always advise against it. At the very least, use the rule of thumb, don't spend any money on any supporter pack that you weren't willing to just throw away anyway. Don't expect anything long-term. Don't expect the game to have a 5-year history if you're buying a supporter pack on launch. It makes perfect sense to buy a supporter pack for a game like Path of Exile that's been around for a decade. You know what you're getting. Some leagues are going to be great, some leagues are going to be kind of shit, but it's still Path of Exile, and at the end of the day, the developers are here for the long term. A new game, especially one that's from a smaller studio, maybe a studio that isn't as experienced within the genre, is much more of a risk. And you know what? If you say, hey, this $20 that I'm going to spend on this supporter pack, if it's gone, it's gone, that's fine, I'll get my money's worth playing early on, or I don't even care, I just hope this succeeds, that's totally fine. But if it's, I'm going to buy this $20 supporter pack or this $150 supporter pack because I expect this to be my main game for the next 10 years, please don't do that. Live service games in particular are extremely volatile, and honestly, I've seen more fail than succeed. With all that said, for the people who came back and tried Wayfinder Echoes, the reception has been very positive. And personally, when I was making this video, I thought, you know what? It's just out on Steam. I can play it. I should probably do my due diligence here and at least jump into the game and see, how does it feel? Well, it kind of feels like Torchlight meets Borderlands. And I was surprised at how fun it was. I was surprised at how fluid the controls were, especially with the jumps. It's a little floaty. It's not necessarily the most grounded, gritty, or realistic. But you know what? It does have something. It has fun. So I can see why the reception has been pretty positive. So I can see why the reception has been largely positive. In fact, I read a few Steam reviews from people who said, hey, I bought a supporter pack because I wanted to support the MMO version. This isn't what I wanted, but I'm surprised at how fun it is. Again, that's not everyone. Some people are very upset. I don't blame them. A lot of people are asking for refunds. For what Airship Syndicate has said, they can't offer refunds because money went to their publisher. And again, just from what I know of these kinds of arrangements, it wouldn't be surprising to me, especially if the publisher considered the project to be risky, if they said, yeah, until we recoup our costs, we're taking the money, we'll give you a certain very small amount to cover your expenses that was probably burned on development and server costs, but the rest comes with us. So when the developer says there is no money, unless evidence comes out to the contrary later, I think it's fair to take them at their word. There's no denying that both Airship Syndicate, the developer, and Digital Extremes, the publisher, made a lot of mistakes with the launch of Wayfinder. And I'm certainly not saying that you should blindly trust Airship Syndicate on their next project. But what I will say is, the easy thing to do in a situation like this would be just shut the game down. And instead, Airship Syndicate chose to do the hard thing. They chose to keep their game active and provide something people could play, even though they couldn't maintain the development of an MMO. And to be honest, that gets them a lot of points in my book. So I wish them nothing but success both with Wayfinder Echoes and their future projects. Hopefully next time they take a lot of the lessons they've learned here and apply them so that it doesn't go wrong from the start. This is also a big reminder as to why we need publishers who understand indie developers, who can advise them on how to properly scope their project, how to monetize it, and how to make sure it's sustainable. For a couple of good examples of that, Hooded Horse Publishing has done an absolutely amazing job so far. They recently launched Manor Lords to extreme success. And it sounds like the game developer Inner Sloth is going to be launching Outer Sloth, an indie game incubation/publishing branch, which should do the same thing to provide the opportunities to other devs that they wish they had when they were small. Who knows, you might see me discuss this stuff more in a future video. Because the other thing is, I think there's a lot of games this could apply to. A lot of games that launched either as an MMO or as a live service. They have a really good core concept, but they just can't keep up with the pace of development. They can't keep their servers stable, and as a result, they're struggling with slowly declining player bases. These games could relaunch, after some reworks, as really solid single-player focused titles. For another example of this in the ARPG space, if 11th Hour Games isn't able to keep up with the pace of updates for Last Epoch, something that we don't know if they will or won't be able to do, I could absolutely see that game being an amazing single-player title and finding a really solid following, just like how Grim Dawn did. Though to be clear, I certainly hope that 11th Hour Games does succeed with their live service model, and I wish them nothing but the best. With that said, I'm curious about your thoughts. What do you think of Wayfinder Echoes and the MMO that died and relaunched as an ARPG? And if you don't know anything about Wayfinder Echoes outside of what I've talked about in this video, what's another game that is a live service or an MMO which has been failing or struggling that you think should relaunch as a single-player focused title? Let me know some of that down below, and who knows, you might even see that as a topic of a future video. Now, if you're looking for something else to watch, maybe you want to see how not to handle your MMO's declining player base, check out my video on New World Eternum, and the absolute PR disaster that Amazon Game Studio is making for themselves. That'll be up in the card and down below. Or if you want to keep up on a lot of news and upcoming games, then head over to MaxwellGG, which will also be linked down in the description. Of course, before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is down below. And also, a big thanks to everyone who watched to the end. I know a lot of the videos on my channel are more guides and gameplay focused, but I've been branching out a bit, and this is something that I've wanted to do for a very long time. Oftentimes in gaming news, it's very reactionary, it's very, this story's half finished. And sometimes, yes, you should make a video as soon as news breaks, even if you don't have the full picture. But other times, a little more care is required, and oftentimes those stories aren't as popular as a result. But hey, I really like looking into Wayfinder, I ended up enjoying playing the game, so even if this video doesn't make the YouTube algorithm happy, I'm glad I made it. With that said, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.